Okay, that's the end of our general meeting for today. I see Dr. Klineberg has joined us, and I just want to say thank you for being here, Dr. Klineberg, but I'm going to turn it over to Carol Ann Ship, who's our coordinator for this program.
Thank you, Julie. I need to preface this with when I first spoke with Dr. Klineberg in the spring and mentioned that his talk might have to be on Zoom because we might not be meeting in person. He said, oh, surely we'll be meeting in person.
That's what I know.
And I was really glad he was optimistic, but here we are. I think everybody knows who Dr. Klineberg is. He has a wonderful reputation from the Kinder Institute. Why can't I speak English today? And everybody knows about his 39-year history of research and his wonderful new book that we just found out we can order and get money for SRUW, because I hadn't ordered it yet. So that's exciting to know. Prophetic City, Houston on the cusp of a changing America. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Klineberg so he can talk to us and tell us all about his research.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much. I'm delighted. I want to see if can I share my screen and,
Yes.
and some PowerPoints? Let's see how do I do that?
Absolutely. You should have the power to do so.
Okay, let's see. Hold on. Okay, here's the one I want. Open it up here. So are you seeing this? You're not seeing this yet.
Once you have it open, you can just hit the little share screen button at the bottom. It's a little green arrow, and then click whatever. There you go. Now it's open.
Oh, okay. Okay, beautiful. So this is working. Everybody seeing this?
Looks good.
Admit, what is this? Okay. Hold on. Slideshow from beginning. Yeah, okay, great. For 39 years, we've been doing these surveys as an undergraduate course at Rice. We began back in 1982. Houston was booming. 1 million people had moved into the city between 1970 and 1982, coming at the rate of 1,380 people a week. 230 cars and trucks every day being added to the streets and freeways of Harris County. Greatest boom anyone has ever seen, brought about by the tenfold increase in the value of oil. This was a one-company town. 82% of all the primary sector jobs in Houston in 1980 were tied into the price of oil. And the price of oil went from $3.20 to 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. We thought it was going to go to $50 oil, and suddenly it dropped down to $28 by the end of 1983, and 100,000 jobs were lost in the city. We said, my gosh, we better do this survey again. And for 39 years, taking a representative random sample of Harris County residents, reached by random telephone numbers, a random adult in each random household, asking people with identical questions over the years, how do you see the world? What is happening in your life? And we have sat back and watched the world change. Houston went into major recession with the collapse of the oil boom, and then recovered into the new America. At the center of what's happening across the country, a new economy, a demographic revolution, and growing concerns about quality of life issues. If Houston's going to make it in the 21st century, it has to become a destination of choice. And so I want to touch very quickly on those three great themes that are the stories of America, surprisingly, unexpectedly, nowhere more clearly seen than in Houston, Texas. So here's the new economy. Well, here's the summary, right? The new rise of a new knowledge economy. The big employers in Houston in the 1970s was Hughes Tool Company, Cameron Iron Works, good blue collar jobs for someone with a strong right arm, a willingness to work hard. Those jobs have disappeared. Education has become the critical determinant of a person's ability to earn enough money to support a family. Growing inequalities predicated above all else on access to quality education. A truly epic transformation the ethnic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. Why here, why now? And again, as I mentioned, this new salience of quality of place. If Houston's going to make it, it has to become a destination of choice. So let me just touch on these three very quickly, and hopefully I'll go as quickly as I can. I'll try to make it as clear as I can, and then a chance for questions and thoughts as we think about what does this all mean for us. Houston turns out to be where all of America is going to be in about 15 to 20 years. We are there first. How we deal with these issues will have real significance, not just for the Houston future, but for the American future. That's my claim. That's why I called the book Prophetic City.
Dr. Klineberg, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
So I wonder what I can do about that.
You look, that's better.
Oh, I just got to talk straight forward here. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Let me know if this is still working. Okay, here's the new economy. Here is the 30 years after World War II. The rising tide lifted all boats. The poorest 20% of American families more than doubled their incomes in the 30 years after World War II. The richest 5% doubled theirs. This was a world of big business, big government, big labor. 38% of the jobs in America were union jobs. The unions can negotiate with the corporations to ensure that workers shared in the prosperity of the companies. And the average American man, whatever his education, literally doubled his income in real terms between 1950 and 1970. And those were the years when we celebrated the stay-at-home housewife mother in suburbia. Oh, excuse me. The average American woman between 1946 and I'm sorry, I've got to get a quick drink here. The average American woman between 1946 and 1964 gave birth on average to 3.6 children. And the baby boom was launched upon the land, preceded and followed by baby bust generations. So for 60 years, there's been a bulge going through the American system. Demographers talk about it like a pig being swallowed by a python. Not very comfortable either for the pig or the python. The leading edge of those 76 million babies born in that incredible period after World War II, between 1946 and 1964, the leading edge turned 74 this year. And we are going to watch a literal doubling of the number of Americans over the age of 65 in the next 25 years. Every day between now and 2030, believe it or not, every day between now and 2030, day after day, 10,000 Americans will turn 65. And by 2030, the youngest of those 76 million will have turned 65, heading off eventually into the proverbial wilderness, being replaced by a very different generation of Americans. It is an epic transformation, nowhere more clearly seen than in Houston. I'll come back to that in just a second. But this is the 30 years after World War II. Here are the last 35 years, when virtually all the benefits of economic growth have gone to the richest 5%, most of that to the richest 1%. 60% of American families, after experiencing a doubling of their incomes in the 30 years after World War II, 60% have found their income stagnating or going down. Striking redistribution of earnings out of the hands of the poor and the middle class into the hands of the rich and the super rich in a striking degree of inequality across the board in America, predicated on education. What happened? Why did the economy change so profoundly? Two big things happened. And then a total failure for 40 years to address those issues. Number one, globalization. We're in a single worldwide global economy. Companies can produce goods anywhere, sell them everywhere. If you are doing a job that I can train a third world worker to do, and I pay that third world worker $15 a day to do that job, I'm not going to pay you $15 an hour. And if you are doing a job that I can program a computer to do, just at the beginnings of the robotics revolution, I'm going to replace your job with an intelligent machine. We are in a new world where education, always a nice thing to have, has now become central to the ability of a person to earn enough money to support a family in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century. Here's one piece of evidence for this. This is the analysis by the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. The educational requirements for jobs across America in the 1970s, there were 91 million jobs in this country. Of those 91 million jobs, 1/3 you were eligible for as a high school dropout. Another 40% required no more than a high school diploma. And here's what's happened to the jobs since then. And by the end of this year in 2020, 65% of all the jobs in America will require education beyond high school. not necessarily 4 years of college, but 1 or 2 years in a community college to acquire the technical skills that connect you to the jobs of the 21st century. Houston is facing a shortage of skilled welders, of skilled electricians, of skilled plumbers, of skilled health technicians. The minimum requirement today is at least 14 years of education, 1 or 2 years after high school, to acquire those technical skills. And the public is understanding that. Here are 2 surprising questions in our surveys. I tell people, we're just asking a representative random sample of people in Harris County. There's identical questions, and we're watching the answers change. One of these questions was, which comes closest to your opinion about the public schools in Houston? The schools have enough money, if it was used wisely, to provide a quality education. Or in order for the schools to provide a quality education, significantly more money will be needed. And during the 1990s, the majority said, of course, this money is being wasted. The schools have all the money they need. And it was 55% to 38. And then during the first decade of the 21st century, it was a kind of a 50-50 split. We stopped asking the question, came back 10 years later in 2018, 55% now said the schools will need significantly more money to provide a quality education. And confirm again in this year's survey, 55% to 39%. A sea change and a recognition that we have not been spending the kind of money or making the sort of investments we need to make to prepare students and young people for success in the very different world of the 21st century. And here's another surprise. We said, are you in favor or opposed to increasing local taxes in order to provide universal preschool education for all children in Houston? Increasing local taxes. You start any question with that and whoa, no, don't touch it. And to our surprise, in 2018, 67% said they were in favor of increasing local taxes to provide universal preschool education. We came back 2 years later in the survey this year, 70% in favor of increasing local taxes to provide universal preschool education. It's a remarkable understanding, right? One of the moments of truth in American education is 3rd grade reading. If you're not reading at the 3rd grade level in 3rd grade, you are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. And the single most powerful predictor whether you can read at 3rd grade level is, did you start kindergarten ready to learn to read? And rich kids start kindergarten 1.5 to 2 years ahead of poor kids in Houston, Texas today. And that gap continues to expand. And it is a place where the brain is growing by 40% between ages 0 and 6. It's synapses are forming. The best return on investment comes in early childhood education. Houston is behind Dallas and it's behind San Antonio in its spending on preschool education and ensuring that poor kids have access to the education they need to prepare their brains for the learning processes of education. And it's one of the reasons why Houston has tremendous inequalities in this city, because access to education is a private endeavor and not provided in the public way. Anything like what the problem in Houston and Texas is that you didn't need money to make education in Texas, to make money into, you didn't need education to make money in Texas. The big Texas fortunes were made from cotton, timber, cattle, oil. The source of wealth in the 21st century has less and less to do with natural resources and more to do with human resources, with knowledge and skills. And here are the inequalities, just a few examples. We asked in our question last year, supposing you had an emergency expense and had to come up with $400. How would you deal with that situation? Would you be able to pay for it out of savings? Would you need to borrow it? Would you not be able to come up with $400 to meet an emergency? And 39% said they could not come up with $400, living on the edge. And this is before the pandemic that has hit us during the beginning in mid-March. Houston has the greatest medical complex in the world in the Texas Medical Center. 100,000 people work there, the largest complex of medical institutions. And Houston has the highest percentage of children without health insurance of any major city in America. 1/4 of all the respondents in our survey this year said that they and their family had no health insurance whatsoever. 1/3 were trying to make it on less than $37,000 a year. Another third had said they had problems paying for the groceries to feed their families in the past year. And another 35% had problem paying for housing during the past year. Growing 1/3 of us living on the edge in a city of incredible affluence at the same time. And the public is increasingly recognizing that people are poor through no fault of their own. They are poor because of circumstances they can't control. And here's a series of questions we've asked about responsibilities of government to address these issues. Government should take action to reduce income differences between rich and poor in America. Grew from 45% to 61% in the survey this year. Government should see to it that everyone who wants to work can find a job. Went from 69, 64% to 79%. Do you think most people who receive welfare benefits are really in need of help, or are they taking advantage of the system? And the percent saying they're really in need of help went from 31 to 47%. And then are you in favor or opposed to federal health insurance to cover the medical expenses of all Americans? Went from 60 to 72%. Not dramatic, but absolutely clear, consistent. I tell people, don't blame me, I'm just asking the questions. Here are the answers, a growing recognition that poverty is something that people inherit and are stuck in and need help in getting out of. And the recognition that we need to make much more of an effort to address the inequalities in Houston than we have in the past. Theme number one, growing inequalities across the board, predicated above all else on access to quality education. Theme number two, a truly remarkable, fundamental, irreversible transformation in the ethnic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. Why here? Why now? Why is this happening? Why is Houston at the forefront? Okay, here's a quick history lesson. This is the number of documented immigrants who have come to America in each of the decades from the 1820s to 2010. So one of the great stories of our lifetimes is that between 1492 and 1965, 82% of all the human beings on the face of this planet who came to American shores, 82% came from Europe. Another 12% were Africans, originally brought here as slaves to serve the Europeans. There was a handful of Chinese and Japanese working as farmers and laborers in California and Hawaii. This nation was an amalgam of European nationalities, deliberately so. We were operating under the last 40 years of that period, between 1924 and 1965, under one of the most viciously racist laws the US Congress ever passed, the National Origins Quota Act, and came out of the great anti-immigrant racist backlash that accompanied the last great wave of immigration when 15.9 million immigrants came to America between 1890 and 1914. Coming from Europe, but not coming from Northern Europe. They were coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they weren't Protestants, they were Catholics and Jews, and they had no history of democracy. They come in to take our jobs and destroy our country. And in 1924, we enacted this incredible act that said from now on, only Northern Europeans will be allowed to come to America. We used the new science of psychology and the IQ test to declare in the act, science has proven that there are 3 subspecies of the white race. The Nordics, who are biologically and intellectually superior to the Alpines, who in turn are superior to the Mediterraneans, and all of them are superior to the Jews and the Asians. And the law codified the Chinese Exclusion Act in California of 1882, the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan in 1906, to declare in that act of 1924, Asians are an inferior subspecies of humanity, ineligible from ever becoming American citizens. And Asians were banned entirely from coming to America. So law of the land through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. You can see what happens to immigration. It plummets. Of course, that's the Great Depression in the 1930s, followed by World War II, the terrible aftermath of World War II. We thought immigration had ended, that racist law could not survive the shifts of consciousness with the civil rights movements of the 50s and early 60s. Jack Kennedy's assassination. Kennedy was one of the great champions of immigration. Last book published after he was assassinated was entitled A Nation of Immigrants, a celebration of how much immigration had brought to this country. And partly in tribute to him, in 1965, Congress changed the law, saying, all right, we used to be a racist nation. We're going to give every country recognized by the UN 20,000 visas a year, regardless of their ethnicity. So get off my back, we're not racist. But we're going to continue the hallmark of American immigration policy, which is family reunification. We're in the business of reuniting families with our immigration policies. If you're the father, mother, sister, brother, son or daughter of an American citizen, you can come to the head of the line. Therefore, said Congress, we think immigration has ended, but if it hasn't, we're going to give preference to people who are related to those who are already here. Then it added another provision. It said, well, if you're a professional of exceptional ability, or if you have skills that are demonstrably needed in short supply, you too can come to the head of the line. And Congress, in its debates in the 50s and early 60s, was saying we need to open the door for some more British doctors, some more German engineers. It never occurred to anyone that there were going to be African doctors, Indian engineers, Chinese computer programmers, Filipino nurses who would be able for the first time in the 20th century to come to America. Law has been changed. It was changed in 1965. It's been called one of the great inadvertent acts that the US Congress has ever passed. In a body known for its inadvertent acts and its unintended consequences, we thought nothing would change. Everything changed. During the 1960s, 3.5 million immigrants came to America. Only 18%, only 38% were from Europe. 1970s, 5 million came, only 18% from Europe. 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, 10 million immigrants per decade have been coming to America, 88% coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. And the United States, that throughout all of our history had been an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world. The first nation in the history of the world that can say we are a free people and we come from everywhere. It's a truly remarkable change. Happening at the same moment as American economy is becoming fully integrated with a single global world economic system. America uniquely a microcosm of all the peoples, all the ethnicities of the world, in a remarkable sort of embodiment of the new world of the 21st century. Immigration, of course, is network driven, so it's not happening the same rate everywhere. The big immigration capital in terms of sheer numbers is New York City, followed by Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, followed right after Chicago by Houston, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Dallas, San Diego, Boston, Atlanta, spreading out to every city and town across America. No city has been changed as rapidly, as fully, as completely, as suddenly as Houston, Texas. This city, throughout all of our history, was a biracial southern city dominated and controlled in an automatic, taken for granted way by white men. And in the space of the last 35 years has become the single most ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the entire country. Here are the census figures for Harris County in 1960. There were 1.243 million people in Harris County in 1960. That was our biracial world. 74% of us were Anglos, 20% African Americans, just 6% Hispanics, less than 0.5% were Asians. During the oil boom years of the 60s and 70s, it was Anglos pouring into Houston from everywhere else in the country. This is where the jobs were. By 1980, Houston became the 4th largest city in America, having surpassed Philadelphia, still a predominantly Anglo city. After the oil bust of 1982, almost 40 years ago, the Anglo population of Harris County stopped growing. And all the growth of this, the most rapidly growing city in America, has been the influx of African Americans, Latinos, and Asians. Here are the last 3 completed decades of the census. Anglo population stabilizes in the 1990s and then drops slightly in 2000 and 2010. African American population growing by 20% per decade, keeping pace with the population as a whole, fueled by African and Jamaican immigration, fueled by the great remigration of middle-class African Americans who'd gone to northern cities in the 20s and 30s, coming back to southern cities, Atlanta first, Houston second, and then surging populations of Latinos and Asians. And the latest census estimates, we'll get the figures when the 2020 census is completed, latest estimates tell us that Harris County today is 42% Hispanic, 31% Anglo, 19% African American, 8% Asian. No city in human history has been transformed as fully, as completely, as suddenly, as irreversibly as Harris County, Texas. Just imagine how different the story of Houston would have been had Houston not become the great magnet for the new immigration of the last 35 years. Houston would have lost population. We would have had the same fate as other major American cities across the country that are losing their status as major cities because they stopped growing. Philadelphia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati. Instead, Houston is one of the most vibrant, rapidly growing cities in America, tremendous entrepreneurial economy, last city to go into recession, the first one to come out, purely because of the tremendous energy, vitality, commitment, and hard work of immigrants pouring into the city from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. No city has benefited more from immigration than Houston, Texas. And it's ironic, but I guess not surprising to see anti-immigrant attitudes in Houston, where you think how different the story of Houston would have been had we not become a magnet and had been like Philadelphia as we were in 1982, the same size. For one reason or another, Philadelphia never became the magnet that Houston became for the new urban growth of the 21st century. Here's a quick way to envision this. This is Harris County in 1980. There are 1,320 census tracts in Harris County, and in blue are all the census tracts in the census of 1980 that had majority Anglo populations. In red are the census tracts that were majority African-American, 3rd Ward and 5th Ward primarily. Along the ship channel was what we called the Segundo Barrio, where the Latinos were, and then a few places around the Beltway in that olive color with no majority. Harris County, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010. Isn't that remarkable? No one having planned this, no one consulted with me before all these people came. Houston finds itself at the forefront of the demographic transformation that's occurring across all of America, nowhere more clearly seen or more sharply articulated than in Houston, Texas. And here's why we make the claim that Houston is the most ethnically diverse metropolitan area in the country. How do you measure the ethnic diversity of a population? 2 ways, as standard ways. One is, what's the percentage of Anglos? The fewer Anglos, the more diverse. A better, more accurate way is what's called the entropy index. How close does a population come to 1/4 Asian, 1/4 Latino, 1/4 African-American, 1/4 Anglo? And by that measure, Houston just beats out New York as the most ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the country. Here are the 7 other most diverse large metropolitan areas. Every successful city in America has been successful largely because it has been a magnet for the new immigration of the last 35 years. But Los Angeles has too few African Americans. Chicago has too many Anglos. Miami has too few Asians. Houston is where the 4 communities meet in greater balance, greater equality. All of us minorities, all of us called on to build something that has never existed before in human history. A truly successful, inclusive, equitable, united, multi-ethnic society made up of all the peoples, all the ethnicities, all the religions of the world gathered together in one remarkable place. It is Houston's destiny in the 21st century to be where all of America is going to be as the 21st century unfolds. And it's not just numbers, of course, it's also ages. So this brings me back to the baby boom generation. So I got babies on the left and old people on the right. I've got 12 different age categories from under the age of 5 to 75 years old or older. And here is where the Anglos are in Harris County, Texas today. Ladies and gentlemen, the baby boom. It's not until you reach people in Harris County age 63 and older that the majority of folks are still Anglos. And at each younger age group, the percentage of Anglos plummets, the percentage of African Americans, Asians, and above all Latinos surges. Here's where everybody else is in Harris County, Texas today. So this is a powerful picture of Houston's present and future, of everybody in Harris County, not inner city Houston, not HISD, of the 4.6 million of us who live in Harris County, of everybody under the age of 20, 51% are Latinos, 19% are African Americans, 9% are Asians, 21% of everybody under 20 in all of Harris County is Anglo. So 2 powerful points to make. 70% of everybody under 20 who will be the workers and citizens and voters and taxpayers of Houston in the 21st century, of everybody under 20, 51% are Latinos, 19% are African Americans, 70% of everybody under 20 is African American and Latino. The 2 groups overwhelmingly most likely to be living in poverty. We know what poverty does to your ability to succeed in the public schools. It is a safe statement to make that if Houston's African American, Latino young people are unprepared to succeed in the global knowledge economy of the 21st century, it is difficult to envision a prosperous future for Houston. That is who we are and will be as the 21st century unfolds. And the other point to make is that this is a done deal. Close the borders. Round up those 10 million people you think are illegally and send them wherever you think they're supposed to go. Seal off this country so not another immigrant or refugee ever again will be allowed to come to this country. Stop this change. I tell people 63-year-old Anglos are not going to be making a whole lot more babies. I tell everybody we'll do the best we can. We'll work on it every chance we get. You can go to the bank on this, right? No conceivable force in the world is going to stop Houston or Texas or America from becoming more African-American, more Asian, more Latino, and less Anglo as the 21st century unfolds. Nothing in the world can stop that. So the only question our generation has been given is, okay, how do we make this work? How do we ensure that this diversity becomes a tremendous asset that can be as we position ourselves in the global economy, the gateway to the global marketplace, and make sure it doesn't end up tearing us apart and becoming a major liability, reducing rather than enhancing our competitiveness in the global economy? Much depends on how this generation speaks to this remarkable convergence of the two forces that have transformed the 21st century before our eyes in our lifetimes: a new economy where education has become critical, and a demographic revolution. So before I get to some few other things, what I'm really interested in is how are people dealing with this? I'll show you that in just a second. But here's what the United States looks like today. The same thing, I got babies on the left, old people on the right. This is still an overwhelmingly Anglo country, but the same pattern, the aging of Anglos, which is a very big part of the story of our lifetimes. Young people disproportionately non-Anglo. And 6 months after we got this data from the census said, okay, all of our estimates now tell us across the entire country of everybody across America under the age of 9, aged 8 and younger, the majority are now African-American, Asian, and Latino. And he said, you want to know what America will look like in 2050? Let's assume no immigration. Let's go just by those actuarial tables. Here's what they say America looks like in 2050. So this is very close to Houston today. It's actually almost identical to Texas today. But it gives me a reason to say to people, you know, this is where the American future is going to be worked out. Houston is there first. By 2050, all of America will look like Houston looks today. How we navigate this transition will have enormous significance, not just for the Houston future, but for the American future. For better or worse, we are one of the key models for what America can be as the 21st century unfolds. And it makes all of our efforts in this city to navigate this transition successfully of transcendent importance. It's not just Houston we're talking about. This is where the American future, for better or worse, is emerging. And you can see it here before you see it almost anywhere else. So how are people responding? So let me just show you very quickly some of our questions about feelings toward immigrant communities in Houston over the years. Agree, disagree, refugees who are in danger in their home country should always be welcome in Houston. Went from 64, which always seemed very high to us back in 2016, to 75 to 77% this year, saying refugees who are in danger in their home countries should always be welcome in Houston. And here, two other questions. We said, here's a 10-point scale where 1 means very unfavorable feelings and 10 means very favorable feelings. Where on the scale would you characterize your feelings about undocumented immigrants? And the percent giving ratings of 7 to 10. Positive ratings for undocumented immigrants went from 24% to 40 to 47 to 49% in this year's survey. And we said, well, what about your feelings about Muslims or the followers of Islam? 35, 45, 48, 60% in the survey this year. An embrace of this new diversity across the board. This is everybody. So if you look just at US-born Anglos, and here's some questions we asked alternating years until through 2019. We'll come back and ask it again in the survey in 2021. Do immigrants contribute more to the American economy than they take, or do they take more than they contribute? The percent who say they contribute more than they take, moving back and forth, going from 30% to 48%. Do you think the increasing immigration into this country today mostly strengthens American culture or mostly threatens American culture? Percent of US-born Anglos saying it mostly strengthens American culture went from 33 to 49% in this year's survey. And you think the increasing ethnic diversity in Houston will eventually become a source of great strength for the city or a growing problem? Percent saying it will be a source of great strength went from 59 to 70%. Again, not dramatic, but consistent. And so we can ask the question, are people, why is this happening among US-born Anglos? Are people changing their minds? Or is it what's called cohort secession? Is it that younger Anglos are coming into the world with different views than older Anglos? And the answer is it's a little bit of both, but it's more cohort secession than anything else. Here's how we tested this. We're asking US-born Anglos in Harris County, all when they were aged 25 to 35, those who were born in the 1960s, the baby boom, those who were born in the 1970s, Gen X, and those born in the 1980s, the beginnings of the Millennial Generation, when all were asked the identical questions, and here's what you find. 67% of millennials, only 50% of baby boomers say the increasing immigration in this country mostly strengthens American culture. 51 to 35% immigrants generally contribute more to the American economy than they take, and 70 to 50% saying the US should admit more or the same number of legal immigrants in the next 10 years as were admitted in the last 10. Younger Anglos are coming into the world saying, what's the big deal here? This is what I love about America, that we older Anglos are struggling to accept. And here's a kind of a fun evidence for what we're talking about. We ask Anglos in this case, have you ever been involved in a romantic relationship with someone who is not Anglo? And here it is by age. And Anglos under 40, 58, 61% said, thank you for asking. Yes, indeed, I have. Here it is for Anglos 40 to 60. And here it is for us older Anglos. I'm afraid the hearts are going to get a little smaller here. A powerful reminder that we older Anglos grew up in a different world. The world of the 1960s and 70s was simply a different place than the world of the 1990s and 2000s. There's a law of human nature that says what I am familiar with feels right and natural, what I'm unfamiliar with feels unnatural and somehow not quite right. Every question we ask about comfort with diversity, support for immigration, shows this pattern with age among Anglos. It's not education, it's not gender, it's age. Younger Anglos coming of age in a world where falling in love with each other, marrying, making multiracial babies. We are moving into a transracial world. We are increasingly comfortable embracing this diversity. So I tell you, you gotta be gentle with us older Anglos. This is a big change in a short amount of time, but also a reminder of what it means to be living in a time of such dramatic change. So theme number 2, a truly epic transformation in who we are as Americans and where we're heading as a nation and as a model for what all of the world is gonna look like. Theme number 3, this new importance of quality of place. If Houston's gonna make it in the 21st century, it has to become a much more attractive and beautiful place. In the old days, in the 1970s, they used to say that anyone could make it, who cares if it's ugly, so what if it smells, it's the smell of money, come on down. Recognizing today, if Houston's gonna make it, it has to become a place where people who can live anywhere will say, I want to live in Houston, Texas. And we've been doing this, a reminder, some wonderful, important, extraordinary things in recent years to make this a much more attractive, a much healthier place. And here's just one example of what we've done. This is why we flood, right? These are the 11 major bayous in Houston. In 2012, the citizens of the city of Houston voted to tax ourselves $100 million. To be matched by $130 million in private monies, to take the 9 major bayous in Houston that were concretized in the cheapest possible way by the Army Corps of Engineers to serve as drainage ditches for our flooding problems. That's what we did down here in the 70s and 80s. No one thought of these as amenities of any value. These are crummy creeks. We've got to straighten them out, concretize them, get the water out of here as fast as possible when there are floods. We voted to build 150 miles of linear parks along all 9 of those major bayous. And by the time the Bayou Greenways Initiative is completed, by the end of 2021, 60% of everybody who lives in the city of Houston will be within 1.5 miles of a bayou trail. Houston will become one of the greenest cities in America. That would have been inconceivable 15 or 20 years ago. This is a city reinventing itself, recognizing that that strategies for economic success need to be different in today's world than when our location in the East Texas oil fields was the basis for our wealth in the 20th century. But flooding, of course, is very real, and we've been following since Harvey the last 3 years. Question that said, do you agree or disagree? It's almost certain that the Houston area will experience more severe storms in the next 10 years compared to the past 10. 75% came back 2.5 years after Harvey. 77% said it's almost certain we're going to have more floods. We said, are you in favor of prohibiting any additional construction in areas of Houston that are repeatedly flooded? 71% dropping. Last year, we don't like government telling us what we can do on our property. And to our real surprise, came back up to 65% this year, saying prohibit any additional construction in areas of Houston that have repeatedly flooded. Part of this is, here's a kind of a new perception of the world that we live in. Questions about climate change. We asked two questions over the years. One is, how serious a problem do you think is the threat of climate change? Would you say very serious problem, somewhat serious, or not much of a problem? In alternating years, 39, 42, 46, 52, came back this year, 51% saying the threat of climate change is a very serious problem. And then even more significantly, we said, what do you think is the primary cause of climate change? Is it human activities or is it normal climate cycles? And the percent of Houstonians in this oil and gas capital of the world saying the cause of climate change is human activities for which we are responsible and we can make changes, not normal climate cycles, was just striking. From 48 to 54 to 58 to 61 to 65. And then again, to our surprise this year, 69%. Saying we humans are responsible for climate change and we have to be responsible for fixing it. And we're in the midst of an energy transition that Houston is either going to lead the way in or get further behind as the world comes to grips with those new realities. And here's the final point I wanted to share with you. This is the city of Houston covering 600 square miles. That is almost as large as the entire, I'm sorry, this is the blob they call the blob that East Texas, 600 square miles. Do you know how big 600 square miles is for the city of Houston? You could put inside the city limits of Houston, Texas, simultaneously, the cities of Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Those four cities cover the same geographical space as the city of Houston, and they contain among them 5.5 million people. The city of Houston contains 2 million people. Then you go out to the greater Houston metropolitan area, the CMSA of Houston, the 9 counties that define the Houston metropolitan area. Here's Harris County, of course, in the middle. This is Fort Bend County, where Sugar Land and Missouri City. We think Fort Bend County may be the most ethnically diverse county on this planet. Fort Bend County today is 21% Asian, 20% African American, 24% Latino, 34% Anglo. Can't get much closer to 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4 than that, right? And up here is Montgomery County, by some measures, the third most Republican county in America. So we encompass a whole bunch of different people. But the greater Houston metropolitan area covers over 10,000 square miles. That is almost as large as the entire state of Massachusetts and considerably larger than the state of New Jersey. This is the blob that ate East Texas. Houston was built on a crummy little bayou, 50 miles from any natural barrier in any direction. No mountains, no forests, no rivers, a developer's dream, built by, for, and on behalf of the automobile, made possible by air conditioning, and we spread everywhere. And we've created a civilization totally predicated on the automobile. We've been asking people in our surveys, if you could live any way you wanted in Houston, what would you prefer? Here are two final questions I want to show you. One is, what kind of neighborhood would you like to live in? A single family residential area, or an area with a mix of developments, including homes, shops, and workplace and restaurants? And it was a 50-50 split. And we said, well, what kind of home would you like to live in? A single family home with a big yard where you would need to drive just about everywhere you want to go, or a smaller, more home in a more urbanized area within walking distance of shops and workplaces? And again, it was very close to a 50-50 split. We think, yeah, what percentage of Houstonians are given the choice of living within walking distance of shops and workplaces? And we thought maybe 10, 15% at the most, 45, 50% say that's how I would like to live in Houston. And what's going on here is not anti-sprawl or anti-big houses. It's a reminder that we are a different folk than we were when we all went out to the suburbs in the 1960s and 70s and built this sprawling metropolis. In the census of 1970, 2/3 of all American households had children living at home in 1970. Well, you have children at home, they need to be out in the suburbs, brand new suburbs being formed, new green spaces. Today, in 2010, it was 1/3. The census thinks by 2020, about 1 in every 4 households will have any children at home. Another 1/4 will be empty nesters. The kids have grown up. I'm living, I work downtown. I love the ballet and the symphony. Do I still want to have to drive 2 hours every day? Do I want to have to mow the lawn? We're trying to attract the creative class, the Millennial Generation. Sociologists talk about the millennials as the postponing generation. They seem to be in no rush to get married, to have babies, to turn us into grandparents. They don't want to be out in big open spaces. They want all the variety and walkability and bar hopping that only urban opportunities can provide. And the fastest growing age segment of the American population are men and women over the age of 80. That population is growing faster than any other population in the country. And I tell people, I'm not sure I want all those 85-year-olds having to drive everywhere in Harris County, Texas. So here again is a growing self-conscious awareness that Houston is in a different place, that we're in a different world today, that we need to think in new ways about what Houston needs to do to position itself for prosperity and success in the 21st century. So just in quick conclusions, the surveys have documented that we are a different folk today than we were only 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Much more ready to acknowledge the need to improve the public schools, to redress the rising inequalities. We're calling now for new initiatives to mitigate future storms, to develop more walkable neighborhoods. And every question we ask shows this remarkable embrace of the diversity, a growing sense that this is who we are. This is the richness of Houston, and few of us would want to go back to what it had been before. This is where all these wonderful restaurants and fiestas and festivals are coming from. The real question is, will the leadership of Houston build on these attitude changes to make the sustained commitments that will be needed for prosperity in this new era of economic, demographic, and technological transformation? We're dealing here with a pandemic that is a triple whammy for Houston, with a massive health pandemics, with the lockdown of the economy, with the collapse of oil prices, growing concerns about systemic racism, all of that changing us in various ways. It's going to be very interesting to go back into the field, as we will in February of 2021, to measure how much this year of the pandemic has affected our views of the world. But the longer term changes, longer term challenges are there, calling for the longer term investments that will ultimately determine Houston's and America's future. So I tell people, stay tuned. We'll go back in the field. It's going to be fascinating to see how we've changed or not during this last 12 months. And if you're interested, download a copy of this year's report from the kinder.ricestudy.edu. Buy a copy of the book. Brazos Bookstore has it, among many others. It's already to some degree obsolete, but really not. I mean, the basic realities, the basic understanding of what has happened to America and to the world, and what Houston needs to do to position itself for success in this new world, that I don't think has changed very much, and is central to the question. I end the book saying the jury is out. The jury is out for Houston, and the jury is out for America in terms of, will we make those investments to ensure that this next generation of kids coming into adulthood in America are prepared to lead the way and to succeed in the new world of the 21st century. So let me stop there. I hope I didn't take too long or throw too much at you, but we'd love to hear your questions and thoughts and comments. And what did I capture? What did I miss? Where did I exaggerate? Any thoughts you have on any of this would be great. So I'm going to stop sharing, I guess, and then we can all be part of a single view. There we are. Great. Hello, everybody. Were you all here? It's so strange to give these talks to I have no idea if anybody is out there. No one's laughing at my jokes. Who's there? So anyway, I'm glad you stuck it out. Thanks for being here, and let me know what questions you have or what thoughts.
Thank you so much, Dr. Klineberg. Let's give him a round of applause, everyone. He can see us
Thank
applauding,
you.
even if he can't hear us.
Okay. I can hear you, actually.
So I had asked for people to post questions on the chat line, but I don't see any questions. So I'll just look and see. You want to raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask a question. That would be fine.
I probably talk too fast.
Okay, I see Carol Ann Ship.
Yeah.
Carol Ann, go.
Carol.
So Dr. Klineberg, I'm a retired educator, and I taught I taught high school in HISD, but I particularly like your point about universal preschool. Have you met with the HISD, with the board or the interim superintendent, and showed them your evidence?
Oh, great. Yeah, well, how about that? Yeah, not directly, because that's why I wrote the book, so that people could see it, and more people are reading it and paying attention. But you know, things are happening. Rena Hidalgo has just said we're setting aside $20 million for universal preschool in Houston. We're recognizing that we are behind, as I mentioned, both San Antonio and Dallas, and that's not tolerable. And that gap between rich and poor is so fundamental. So that the story in Houston is that people understand and see these challenges. The challenge in Houston is that we're not very good at translating concerns into action. We're not good at raising taxes to address these issues in a sustained way. We're good at volunteering. We have a lot of philanthropy, but in the long run, systematic taxes is needed. And Houston and Texas are at the bottom in their spending on education across the board. So that's increasingly recognized. And whether we can change the trajectory is really the great question.
Well, and particularly the HISD and the school board, it doesn't have a reputation for good stewardship. And that's
Right.
part of the problem.
And we're maxed out on the sales tax, and we're maxed out on the income, on the property tax. So there's no clear way to raise money. And then meanwhile, during this pandemic has put enormous new burdens on the city and cut back on the taxes that the city is collecting. So it really, I think, if we're going to make it, we've got to do it. I think every business in Houston ought to adopt a school. And every worker in Houston ought to be able to take one afternoon a month to tutor a child, to mentor a kid coming out of enormous hardship and difficulty, to help them with their homework, to let them know that someone is paying attention and cares. Every church should have an after-school and preschool program, right? We're not going to throw money at these problems. Can't we find a way to throw people at these problems? The great resource in Houston is the people who live here. We ought to, every one of us, figure out a way to make some piece of the difference, and then we would turn it around.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If you decide to run for office, I'll be happy to.
Okay. I don't think so.
I think it's difficult right now for the churches, you know, like First Pres has the Nehemiah Center, which has been going for over 20 years. But right now it's very hard for them. They're trying to think of ways in this environment to still mentor the children because we can't go there in person.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
we can't, and when the children can't go there in person. And so you're trying to take a program that was and has been successful, but now is being burdened by really great challenges.
The pandemic. Sure.
And so we'll just have to see where that takes us. I know they're working on exploring ways for more volunteers to work in a remote environment, but that's since that has a lot of challenges, since a lot of the older people are the ones that are being the mentors.
Yes.
And they're not always technologically as able to work in this environment. And the other question I had was in terms of, that I'm a baby boomer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on the lower end of it, but it looked to me like, I wondered though, is life expectancy reduced, and is that affecting the burden that will place, is that helping with the burden of the aging population at all? Or has there been any statistics looking at that?
Okay, great question. Well, first of all, let me answer that question first. America is, there are groups in America whose life expectancy is shortened now, and the group that is suffering the most in America, the one demographic whose life expectancy has dropped, who are dying of what economists call the diseases of despair, drug addiction, alcoholism, obesity. It is white men with high school educations or less, living in small town or rural areas.
Oh gosh!
Used to work in the coal mines and the steel mills that disappeared. And I'm watching America's paying no attention to my group while they're focusing on blacks and Latinos, and that's the desperation. And to the fault of our politics is that we have not yet found a way to bring everybody everybody together there.
That's interesting because I hadn't really heard a lot of discussion on that. Although you can certainly see where it is a reality. I go to West Virginia every year, and
Right, that's where you see it from.
you know, and are also just in terms of if you've done anything with children that are of high school age. My son teaches in a high school. There's a lot of at-risk young people there who are not seeing a future.
That's right. That's right.
And so that it is difficult if we can't define a future that they can look forward to.
Reach for, right, absolutely. On the other hand, just to remind us, you know, we are living longer, healthier lives than human beings have ever lived in the history of human life on this planet. We said you should retire at the age of 65. And we picked that age in 1907, when 6% of Americans lived to the age of 65. And we said, well, my gosh, you make it to 65, you'd be taking care of the rest of us. Those couple of months you have to go fishing or to sit on your porch. It's incredible expansion of life. You reach 65 in good health in America today, you have a quarter of your life ahead of you.
Mm-hmm.
Just talk about the young old. You don't get to be old until you're in your late 80s and early 90s. It's a remarkable sort of story. And of course, we baby boomers and earlier are the great beneficiaries of that reality. But you're exactly right. Question is, what happens after us? What happens as we head off into the sunset? This new generation is coming far less prepared for the jobs. And of course, when we came of age in the 50s and 60s, that was the golden age. You could not make money. They used to say in Houston in the 70s, you could dress a gorilla in a business suit, send them downtown in a week. You know?
Dr. Klineberg, we're almost at the end of our hour. If you're willing to stay on a few extra minutes, I'm sure we have some more questions. I know.
Oh, for sure. And my wife keeps telling me, don't give another speech, just answer the questions. So I'll try to do that.
Well, formally, let me just say thank you so much for coming. I know you're a highly in-demand speaker, and your book has been a big success. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And
it only took me 38 years to write it.
And let me turn it over to Betty, who has a question for you.
Oh, great. Betty.
Turn off. You have to turn yourself on, Betty. Unmute yourself.
There you go.
Yes, I was interested. I'm a second-generation native Houstonian, and so I have witnessed, you know, the growth in the traffic and the lack of the public transportation and all of that. And you didn't mention any of this. And of course, we were talking about the people and the changes in Houston, but I see the traffic situation as, or I wonder how you fit that into your future here for Houston, because we're spread out. So I know myself, I don't like to have to go an hour away much anymore just to go do something in Houston. But
you bet, Betty.
How it affects the people living further and further away and apart, and the businesses, or just any thoughts on
oh, you bet. Well,
you're headed with transportation issues.
You bet. Well, you know, this is the most spread out, least dense, most automobile dependent city in America, or close to Phoenix, maybe the most, but it's very close. And it is not a city and suburb anymore. It's a multi-centered metropolitan region. It's called the MCMR, multi-centered. This is a region covering the geographical space of the state of Massachusetts with 8 to 9 major activity centers that are larger than downtown San Diego. That's the story of Houston. And so the result is often we have to travel great distances to get from one place to another, but we're also able to find sort of enclaves of urban walkability in town centers, in town squares of the woodlands and Sugarland that are beginning to point us toward where we might want to go. And more of us are, as you look around in Houston, you see more high rise, more density. One of the best descriptions of Houston from 20 years ago was that Houston is one of the few places where almost wherever you are, you think you're at the edge of town. It's the real truth, much less true today, right? I mean, now you've got density in all kinds of places. And when we ask people in our opening question, first question we ask is, what would you say is the biggest problem facing people in the Houston area today? It used to be the economy. It used to be, before that, it was crime. overwhelmingly today, it's traffic, right? And that awareness of the central challenge of getting from one place to another, as we add more and more people, we can't keep building more roads. Someone once said that trying to solve the transportation problems by building more roads is like trying to deal with your weight problem by buying a bigger pair of pants. It gives you a little bit of relief for a little while, but doesn't get to the heart of the problem. And Houston's great challenge is mobility as we go forward. And that's where you're going to begin to see more and more options of various sorts. And people in bike lanes and walkability and Uber and Lyft are going to playing more and more roles. And we're going to find a whole variety of different alternative ways of getting around. And this pandemic will be very interesting to see. We have all learned now that we can get along on Zoom. We don't have to be face-to-face all the time. So one thought is that we may end up being able to live almost anywhere we want and commute by digital means, and then maybe once or twice a week going into the office to meet. And we're going to do a lot of our shopping online, and so those shopping centers are going to turn into places of condominiums and apartments, and we're going to see as more of us, as I was saying, no longer have children at home and need to be in big places with green space and the big yards. The business community is responding to that in ways that are going to build a whole lot of new alternatives for all of us as the next period of years goes by. But those are good questions. Very fascinating to watch this totally car-dependent city again reinvent itself for the whole variety of ways of getting around that will be the 21st century.
I find that so fascinating because, you know, I lived in the East for a long time, and I was there when Reston and Columbia, Maryland were being built. And at that point, way back then, this was supposed to be the new model, everything walkable, you know, let's change what we're doing. And yet here we are right back to it. You know, it seems like we never quite get there. It's like something we say we want, but we're very content to just let this, and I grew up in LA, so, you know, we're very content to live with what it is until it becomes a price problem, and then we suddenly want to do something about it, and that makes it so much more difficult and so much more expensive to do.
Right, but that's the question: have we reached that point for many of us, where there really is a desire for something different? And because we built a society totally, everybody lived in single family housing out in the suburbs, right? Almost purely, and you didn't like the city. And now of course there's this return back to the city movement coming because we're different folk, right? We have different needs. We're no longer giving birth to 3.6 children. When these millennials have kids, they're not gonna have 3.6, they're gonna have 1.4, we think, on average, maybe 1.5 total number of children. They don't need those gigantic houses anymore. And more the urban life and the variety and a big part of it is that we are more and more comfortable now with diversity. We're not afraid to have neighbors who don't look like us and have different proclivities. And all of that has created new opportunities for a city to reinvent itself, and cities all across the country are doing that. Houston is especially well positioned to do that.
It seems to me that in that sense, to Houston's advantage, I mean, I hate to say there's advantages, but the pandemic is in a sense an advantage because it's forced much more rapidly a change in realization that you don't have to go into work every day, that you can work from home. I mean, this trend was around at my federal government job. They were always pushing to let people telework 1 day a week and all these alternative work schemes, but managers resisted. Now there's no choice, and so everyone's getting used to it.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to measure how much we will have changed as a consequence of the pandemic. But the other piece that we're touching on is the terrible underlining of the inequalities in Houston. Rich kids are doing fine, thank you. Poor kids are falling further behind now, even further than they were before. The gap, the underlying the inequalities, especially for Blacks and Latinos in Houston, that is a powerful reminder that this is not a viable solution to building a city that can survive in the 21st century. You cannot build a sustainable city without ensuring that there's opportunity for people. right? This whole meaning of cities is that it's a place for opportunity. And in Houston and in most urban cities now, less and less opportunity for poor folks. So that's a real part of the other underlying piece. So it's going to be interesting to see how we deal with all that. But poor kids with inadequate internets and with parents who have to work and can't be home to help them are falling further and further behind. We're already behind in the education that is so critical. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out as we go forward.
So, Dr. Klineberg, I have a question. So, so my concern or my observation or my question is, how do we compare with the rest of the world? I'm thinking about Africa, Asia, South America. Are they finding solutions for these concerns that we are not paying attention to? I just wonder, I don't feel like we ought to be having to invent things that haven't already been in other places.
Yeah, beautiful point. I mean, what Houston is dealing with, almost every major city in America and almost every major city on the planet is dealing with in different ways. And there's an enormous amount to learn. And we have so much we can learn from Canada that is doing such a better job than the United States in reducing the inequalities and ensuring opportunities. Europe, talk about socialism. The goal of socialism is not Venezuela, it's Denmark, right? Which is doing beautifully and reducing those inequalities and making the investments and ensuring that opportunity is there. We're way behind on these things. We're 38th in our spending on education across the board. I mean, there's enormous amounts to learn from other cities, other nations, and recognizing that we all have a lot to learn from each other because we're all facing very, very similar challenges. And Houston has a lot going for it, but also has a lot of challenges and is not yet dealing with them as effectively as we need to, I think.
Thank you so much. It's just been mind-blowing, and it's so wonderful to see it mapped out so many different ways. I must say I have had very little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, but to see it mapped out across the board is so valuable.
Thank you. That is useful. There it is, and don't yell at me. I'm just, here it is. I didn't do the census, but this is maybe the most fascinating, the most interesting, the most consequential city in America. It's striking that we are there first on so many of the things that are happening across the country, and more and more people outside of Houston are recognizing this is a really important city. And it's been interesting to see that as more and more people, I don't know if you notice, I pay attention to how often is Houston mentioned in the news and in what kind of context. More and more there are favorable mentions of Houston. And we Houstonians are sort of have a chip on our shoulders because people never paid attention to us. They all denigrated what Houston was. They never realized how wonderful the city is. The story of Houston, I tell people, most of us came here from somewhere else. And we came reluctantly. Yuck, the job is in Houston. We'll go for a couple of years and then we'll go to some wonderful place. And most of us have stayed and have discovered this is actually a wonderful place in itself. And so it's been, the other thing I tell people is, I get unfairly credited with having planned to do this. This was a one-time survey back in 1982. Never occurred to me to do it again. 2 months after that first survey, the oil boom collapsed. I said, my God, we better do the survey again. And then because it was Rice, I could offer a course in the spring each year to these wonderful students who worked with me each year to develop the questionnaires, to analyze the data. And I got credit for teaching a course. And the result was that we were really able to track, no city has been tracked as long as Houston in this way. And no city has undergone the kind of changes that Houston has experienced. So it's been just a fascinating kind of opportunity for all of us.
I'd like to say that I was one of those students who called people.
Thank you. Okay, I see all my buddies here. I still do.
Back
in
the
late. I guess that's right. Thank you. It was a while ago.
You were so smart. I wish I would have been smart enough to take him.
There you go.
Say, we are so honored. I have heard you speak I'm sure it's north of 30 times, but I
Okay.
don't miss one time to hear from you. And we are so grateful, given most of the time I have to go, although I miss those galas or events. 1,000+ people are gathered to hear you. And I think you're really too humble. You're not unfairly credited. There's absolutely no doubt that part of the impetus, while we are seen as the prophetic city, given obviously the appropriate coining of the term to you, is because you have ensured that as all of these things came to fruition and as Houston was built the way it has been and grown, that you talked about it and that you emphasized it, and you further put us on the map. So we are so proud of that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And documented it in a way that we can all be proud of our home city. Houston pride is important to us, I think all.
Yes, yeah, we have a right to be proud.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kleinberg.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. It's great fun to be with you. Just call me back next year when we will have had a full year of the pandemic and can measure change by this process.
That'll be fascinating.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Great to be with you. Okay, I'm gonna leave. Bye.
I'm back again next year.